This is The Weekly Set, an official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com.
I wish I was the monster you think I am.
You have come here to beseech me?
Can't ask for your soul.
Madness can be a medicine for the modern world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Weekly Set, the official podcast of The Total Screen. I'm your host. My name is Tyson, and joining me today, as always, is my partner in crime here at The Total Screen, William Rohrig.
Hello.
So today, for episode 261 of this podcast, we are going to be discussing The Plot Against America, the HBO miniseries from David Simon, the creator of The Wire and Show Me a Hero and Generation Kill and a bunch of other HBO projects. I think he pretty much exclusively works with HBO. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the history of this project, Simon's role in adapting it kind of for contemporary times, even though it's not a contemporary piece, the original book, and kind of some of the differences that were there. Neither of us have read the original book, but we've looked it up a little bit, so we know some details about it, so we'll talk about that. And then also just kind of the historical messages that are in it, like the things that are actually, there's some real history in this, but there's also some alternate history. I should start off just by saying that if you've never heard of The Plot Against America, it's probably best for you to watch it before listening. We'll spoil stuff through the course of the conversation, I'm sure. Like, we don't necessarily have detailed plans to mention spoilers, but I'm sure they'll come up. So yeah, it's a pretty bleak show, but it's a really good show. It's basically an alternate history in which in the early 1940s, Charles Lindbergh, the famed pilot, you've probably heard of Lindbergh's baby, that was his baby. So Charles Lindbergh decides to run for president in this alternate history fiction. Because of that, he ends up winning. He's a very populist candidate. He's anti-Semitic. He's a Nazi sympathizer. And because of those things, there's like a huge difference in kind of the direction America goes during that period of time. And it's kind of reminiscent of some of the divisiveness that's going on now. There's some things that are different just because of the times, but there's some pretty stark similarities. So we're going to go over that.
Now the book that it's based on, that was written before the Trump era, right?
I think it was like 2004, so it wasn't so long ago, but it was before the Trump era. It wasn't before Trump, but it was before the Trump era.
Right. I mean, before Trump became president.
Yeah, Trump was already, I think by that point, Trump was already kind of into politics as far as like making comments and, doing things like that. He had kind of showed up on Fox News and was doing shit, but he wasn't running for office yet, obviously.
But at the same time, what's striking about this is that this kind of parallels kind of what we're actually going through in real life, which I believe is one of the reasons David Simon probably decided to adapt it.
Oh, I think it very much is the reason he decided to adapt it. David Simon is, if you're hesitant to go towards things that are kind of political, David Simon is very political. So he's, he's a good, if you're into that, he's a good person to like follow on Twitter and stuff, because he's pretty aggressive in his politics. He's very left wing, and he will make that known. So the second I heard about this project and that David Simon was doing it, I'm like, oh, of course David Simon's doing this. This makes like so much sense. This is like the ultimate project for him in this time period for him to do. So, have you ever seen anything else that David Simon's done? Have you watched The Wire or Show Me a Hero?
I actually haven't.
Kill? Okay.
I can't say I have.
The Wire's probably his most famous work. That was like a really good HBO series. Like I said before, all of his stuff is HBO, I believe. Him and his partner, Ed Burns, wrote all of those shows. So I should note a little bit about who David Simon is. David Simon was a journalist that ended up becoming a TV writer. Ed Burns, his writing partner, used to be a police detective and then ended up becoming a writer. And from their unique perspectives of the two of them, because I believe Ed Burns was also a teacher at one point, they collaborated on a lot of stuff that kind of dealt with like inner city issues and problems and stuff. It's usually a lot of their stuff is been kind of about like black communities and the way police affect the black communities and stuff, which is like very timely for what's happening exactly right now. Like it's funny that Plot Against America is very timely for Donald Trump, but like his past works, you could go back and watch and they'd be very timely for what's going on right now.
Right.
With like the Black Lives Matter stuff. So he was kind of like early in on that, and it was a big kind of political statement for him, and he was really involved in that kind of content and did a bunch of shows about that. He also did a miniseries called Show Me a Hero that was about a public housing complex that was being built up, and they wanted to kind of build it and have it like integrated into like a regular city instead of like pushed off into a ghetto somewhere. And they had like a lottery system for getting people, and there was like a lot of people that were opposed to it, to like these low income families moving in, and it's kind of like a true story about that. So this is kind of, you kind of get the idea of the kind of stuff David Simon makes. The author of the book, Philip Roth, is a very well-respected Jewish author. He's basically been pretty close to winning the Nobel Prize on like 2 occasions. David Simon made a joke about how he had lost it one year to, like, oddly enough, to Bob Dylan. It was one year Bob Dylan won, like that, and he was kind of bitter about that because it's like he wasn't exactly, like it was supposed to be a category for literature and didn't really make sense. But he's a very, very well-respected author, and he writes often about Jewish issues, about Jewish communities and Jewish family. And in fact, the main family in the series is based entirely on his own family. So in the book, which is different from on the show, it's the Roth family. And if you notice, the youngest son's name is Philip, so that's him. So he's basically the book is told from the perspective of Philip Roth, the youngest of the sons. And it's like his perspective on everything that's happening. And because of that one difference in the book is that stuff is a little bit off because it's from the perspective of a child and of an adult looking back on his memories as a child versus having all these different perspectives, which the series does. The series kind of has a few different viewpoints, you know? So a lot of the stuff that's missing in the books that's in the show could very well have actually been in the books, or not in the books, but like in the story of the books in the background, but we don't see it because we're not seeing it from that perspective. So that plays a big part in that. We should talk a little bit about Lindbergh, who is the kind of key figure that this goes around. He was a war hero, a pilot, a very respected person, probably the most beloved, like, heroic figure in America at that time. He also just happened to say some very anti-Semitic comments and was very against going to war with Germany and was a bit of a Nazi sympathizer. He blamed Jews for creating a conspiracy against Hitler to try to get us into a war in Europe that was against America's interests. And so that was kind of like, he was this heroic kind of figure, and then he kind of went in this very like right-wing dark direction. And the book is kind of going, or the book and then the show based on the book, obviously, are going with the perspective of if he had run for president. And people wanted him to run for president at this time. So Will and I talked before the show, and we were talking about how he didn't actually run for president in history, but there was a lot of speculation that he might. People expected that he might run for office, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt was terrified at the prospect of him running for president. And this is when FDR was going to go for his like 3rd term. This is before term limits were put in place. A 3rd term was kind of frowned upon, but like there weren't any rules against it. And he was going to go for a 3rd term primarily because his party didn't have a candidate that could even stand a chance against somebody like a Lindbergh. And he was the only one who possibly could. And even that was like unlikely. Like Lindbergh probably would have won if he had run, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like watching this, we're lucky that Lindbergh never ran for president.
Yeah.
When I watched the show, I went back and I looked up Charles Lindbergh because, to be honest, I didn't really know a lot about the guy. I knew
probably heard of Lindbergh's baby. That's probably what everybody thinks of when they hear Lindbergh.
I knew he was an aviation hero, and I knew like his baby like was kidnapped or something. You know, like I didn't know too much beyond that. Like I didn't like really care. I never found the guy interesting. Mm-hmm. So but I looked it up and I was like, wow, this guy is like a major asshole. It's like.
Yeah.
Huge anti-Semite, you know, you can tell he was cozying up to Nazis, and it's like, yeah, I can see it. Like,
He wasn't the only one, too. There was, in the UK, the guy who was basically going to be king. I can't remember his name, but Prince George ended up becoming King George. That was, Queen Elizabeth, the current Queen Elizabeth's father. But his older brother was supposed to take the throne, and he abdicated the throne because he wanted to marry this American woman, and there was a bunch of issues about that. And so basically, he was found like that if he wanted to do that, he would have to abdicate the throne, and he did. And it's a good thing because his father died not too long after George took over the role as going to be like his, who followed in his footsteps. And he was also a big Nazi sympathizer and had attended parties in Munich and Germany with Hitler and stuff. So they're like, you think about like the big Western powers, you know, the main ones you're going to think of are probably the US and England, you know?
Right.
And we potentially had a position in which we would have had two Nazi sympathizers, one in each country, in positions of high leadership. Obviously, you know, the king in England doesn't really have the kind of control that they had in like the medieval ages or something, you know? It's mostly like parliament and stuff, but still, it's a position that's like popular and demands a lot of attention from the people and can influence that. So it's kind of scary how close we came to that, you know? Not just here, but like in England too.
And this show explores how scary it would be if we got a president during World War II that sympathized with Hitler and the Nazis.
Yeah, and it's shockingly similar to some of the stuff that's happening now.
Yeah, it very much feels like, you know, what's happening now. You know, probably like, because, yeah, that's basically what's happening at this moment, is we have a white supremacist president who sympathizes with that group.
Mm-hmm. The key difference being that when Philip Roth wrote the book, he never thought like a Donald Trump was possible. He thought a Charles Lindbergh was possible because he was this like, in order for people to swallow the bitter pill of his racism, they would have to need like a better image. And he was like a war hero and like, you know, charismatic and attractive. And, you know, like he fit that mold, like the white savior figure. Then you'd accept that and you'd get all the racist crap that went with that, you know?
Right.
But Trump really isn't that. Trump's kind of like a miserable failure of a businessman who's just creepy and way past his prime.
A moron.
Yeah, he's a bumbling moron. It's like there's so much, you know, and if you don't agree with the politics of that, sorry, but like, you know, I think it's pretty clear that that's exactly what he is. And the idea that we got like a Donald Trump and we didn't even have the other side to balance out the poison pill, which was, we never got the war hero. We never got the, you know, like if we got like John McCain and he turned out to basically have the exact same views as Trump and started pushing all this racist agenda that Trump pushed or something, that would kind of make sense because you're like, oh, okay, well, we voted in a war hero, but we ended up getting all this crap, you know? But no, we didn't vote in a war hero. We voted in somebody completely unlikable. And we got all the bitter racism and shit with it.
Right.
It's a point that I guess Philip Roth made with David Simon. If you listen to, and I recommend if you watch the series to listen to the podcast for the series. And David Simon talks about when he met with Philip Roth and Philip Roth kind of pointing out the differences between Trump and Lindbergh, basically being all towards the positive of Lindbergh, saying like, you know, yeah, Lindbergh was like a racist populist person and all this stuff in the same way that Trump is, but like there was actually a reason that made sense why he was elected. You know, which is different.
Right. Trump's only president because a lot of people are stupid. Like,
yeah. So it's not only Lindbergh that's like a historical figure in this. As I mentioned, Philip Roth, originally in the book, it was the Roth family. They changed it to the Levin family for the TV show on Philip Roth's, request. But, it's pretty much the same otherwise in that. Philip Levin is the stand-in for Philip Roth. Philip Roth's father really was an insurance salesman. Like there's a lot of the kind of relationships and family dynamics were real family dynamics for Philip Roth. That was his actual life. It wasn't just that he named the people after them the same or gave them the same position, but like they were very much in that same mold as these characters. And he just kind of added them into the story. It's kind of almost backwards from what you'd think. Like you'd think he took a story about this alternate history thing and then put his family into it. But it's more like he was writing a memoir about his family and then added in this alternative history thing,
Right.
And that's what the show really is, because it's, as much as it's about this big thing, like the show's really more about the family. It's about like what happens to, it's a microcosm. It's showing like what happens to a single family within this big situation. So you have this big alternate history, and now like you have this, you're seeing everything from the perspective of one family. So it's very much like of a smaller scale because of that. There were some other kind of big figures that were like real figures. Walter Winchell, who is the radio host that the father Herman was really obsessed with and was listening to constantly, and who ended up running for president and was assassinated. That was based off of a real person also named Walter Winchell, who was very much similar to how he was in the show, except apparently there's some areas where he's not necessarily that great. Like he was kind of pro-McCarthyism and stuff, and that happened later. But like that was like a believable thing that you'd have this kind of figure and how he would react to Lindbergh running for president. And because he was such a big name in radio that, you know, let's say he was fired from his position, maybe he would run for office as somebody that would be popular that could possibly win out against Lindbergh. So that was like another real figure. A really notable real figure would be Henry Ford, who was shown in this as an extremely racist asshole. It's something that I think a lot of people either don't know or like to, you know, forget about Henry Ford, is that he really was like a really bad racist.
He was deeply anti-Semitic.
Yes. Hitler actually had stated it, admiring Ford on several occasions. So
yeah.
That kind of tells you a little bit about that. So yeah, he makes, you know, a few appearances in there and is particularly vile. Let's move on, though, and kind of talk about the family dynamics in the show.
So the show really focuses in on this family and how the events unfolding in the nation specifically affect them. And it's sort of like what you see over the course of the show is the events that are happening kind of put stress on this family to the point that the family itself begins to unravel towards the end. And it's pretty heavy stuff.
Some people are much more, some people are like kind of your hero characters, the ones that you like, but at the same time, you're kind of like, you get exasperated with because they're just the way they're acting. A perfect example, that would be Herman, the father. You agree with him and his positions and you respect him, but at the same time, you're like, Jesus Christ, shut up every so often. You know? Like, you know, and you could see his wife giving him those looks saying basically the same thing. Like, you're putting our whole family in danger. Shut the fuck up, you know?
Well, yeah. Like he gets so intense, right? He gets so intense to the point where he comes to odds with almost everybody in his family.
Yes.
To one point where there's one point towards the end where like his youngest son, you know, he's just like asking questions or something, and he's about ready to like smack him straight up across the face, which you wouldn't even think would happen at the beginning of the series. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like it kind of takes you back when you see it. It's kind of like, whoa, okay.
That smack actually did happen in the book.
Yeah.
So that was a deviation, and apparently they did that because they'd already had a scene in which his wife had slapped their oldest son and slapped him really hard, and they said it would kind of take away from that moment. And also it would just make him look like almost irredeemable because the actor's kind of a big guy too, so it would look really bad with him smacking that little kid, you know? It'd be hard for people to identify with him again. So they just kind of did it where they put him to the brink of like where he almost slapped his son and then didn't. He drew back and he said, "This isn't a game," which is like an important thing, you know? I thought the character that was almost intolerable to watch was Sandy Levin, the oldest brother of the two.
Sandy is kind of like dazzled by, you know, he's dazzled by Charles Lindbergh, right? He's full on like this image of him as like this aviation hero, you know, it's somebody he looks up to. So he very easily gets sucked up into this, you know, he gets manipulated by the people around him who side with Charles Lindbergh.
Well, he started getting into it even before they got into it, and made it so much worse. But yeah, he was, I think he was kind of in that state in his life, and they bring this up on the podcast too, where he was already going to be kind of a dick. He was at that age where he was questioning authority and like pushing back against his dad and stuff. And then you just kind of add in this element of like hero worship for Lindbergh and the divisiveness of the nation, and then it ends up just becoming something so much worse.
Right.
He becomes somebody who just kind of excuses all of Lindbergh's behavior, ignores it, calls anybody who goes against Lindbergh like a liar. He refers to his father as being like worse than Hitler.
Yeah.
In one blow up. Which, I don't know, like back then they probably didn't know the full extent of how evil Hitler was. I don't think like anybody did. I think some of that started coming out. A lot of the news about concentration camps and stuff, the real information about it started coming out like after the war.
Right, yeah.
When they were like liberating the camps, and finding these people that had been emaciated and finding records and photos and stuff. That's when it started really coming together how horrible what was actually happening there was. So they already knew it was bad, but it was, it's just kind of a cringy thing to hear some older teen or not older teen, like younger teen be like, you're worse than Hitler, Dad,
Yeah, exactly. Like his path takes he becomes literally, not even basic, like literally the poster child for Lindbergh's programs.
Speaking of Lindbergh's programs, we should talk about the rabbi, Bengelsdorf, and Evelyn, who is Bess, Herman's wife Bess. Her sister is Evelyn, who ends up becoming involved with this elderly rabbi, who is a widower. And this is a rabbi who is fully selling Lindbergh's message, even though it's very anti-Semitic.
Yeah, this rabbi is on full Team Lindbergh. And basically what I think, like, the programs that they start promoting are basically Bengelsdorf's ideas.
Yes.
They're not even really, like, Lindbergh's ideas. This is, like, Bengelsdorf, driving the majority of the stuff. And he thinks, and the tragedy of his character is he genuinely believes that he can, like, steer the administration in the right direction as far as the Jews are concerned.
He's got a bit of a messiah complex where he thinks like he knows best for his people.
Yeah. He thinks he can, he thinks he can help them out, He says like, he doesn't believe like Lindbergh is truly anti-Semitic. And so that's what he believes, but really like in reality, he's just being used, right? He's just like, oh yeah, that's my Jewish friend.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I can't be anti-Semitic. That's basically it.
Yeah, they referred to this on the podcast as koshering.
Yeah.
That he was koshering, his purpose was to not to get Jewish people to support Lindbergh, but to get white people to not feel guilty about voting for Lindbergh because, hey, this Jew supports them.
Right, yeah, exactly. So how could I be supporting an anti-Semite when this Jew supports him and it's fine? Back
to Trump, this would be Ben Carson.
Yeah.
It's like, well, here's Trump's black friend. So Trump has a black friend. So clearly he's not a racist because here's a black person supporting him.
It's just like, the token minority that these white supremacists use to excuse, to try and make people doubt their white supremacism.
Yeah, to make them, to give them an excuse.
Yeah, to give them an excuse.
So they can feel better about themselves while they vote for an anti-Semite. Evelyn becomes involved with him. That's Beth's sister, as you had mentioned. In the book, it's her younger sister. In the show, it's her older sister. And David Simon referenced that he wanted to do that because in Jewish culture, there's a very there's a big thing about getting married and the order of siblings and getting married in the order that they grew up. So it was like, oh, you're of the age for marrying now. You should be getting married. And to have this character who it hasn't worked out for them. And they're now older and her younger sibling is already married and has, 2 kids, has a family, and here she is still kind of caring for her elderly mother and not married, not, involved, and just kind of the pressures of kind of Jewish culture on that as an influence for how she kind of became the way she was. And it kind of gives an idea of part of why she becomes enraptured with the rabbi, because it's not just that she's attracted to his views or charmed by him as a person, but he's the ultimate nice Jewish boy to bring home to mom,
Yeah.
He's a rabbi. you know?
Yeah.
And he's interested in her. He's powerful too, which makes her feel like all that waiting was worth it because she ended up with somebody more important, more powerful.
Because when we first meet Evelyn, she's with this guy who's not Jewish, and you know, her
married man, yeah.
Yeah, he's also married to make matters worse. But like her sister is like, you know, needling her because she's dating a married man, and you know, one of her things her sister says is, you know, why can't you find a nice Jewish boy, you know? And so that's what she does.
Yeah. So these kind of things motivate her direction as like a kind of a weak person who then latches on to perceived strength and uses that to kind of elevate her position and feel better about herself. And this kind of like establishes the relationship between the rabbi and Evelyn. With, you know, Evelyn just buys everything the rabbi says because, you know, by doing so, by being with him, she's like elevating her position, even to the point in which she's like tearing her own family apart.
Right. Now she feels important and needed, and you know, it's basically emotional self-fulfillment for her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what's going on. And it's through Bingelsdorf and through her that the Lindbergh administration has a direct through line to this family.
Yes. And it's through those two as well that two different programs are enacted, one after another. First, they initiate a program where they're going to send Jewish kids off to stay in kind of the heartland, the real America, as Bingelsdorf would say, is just, you know, because he was a Southern Jew. He was raised in the South, and just kind of like, oh, we'll send Jewish city kids off to the farms and they'll learn what real America is like. And this is kind of how he envisions it, is like the idea of this is integration into society. You know, Jews, let's take the Jewish out of Jewish American, basically. Like, you know, let's get rid of that hyphenated word and just turn it into Americans. Like, Jewish doesn't matter, American matters. And we're going to integrate so much, we're just going to strip away the culture so that people accept us. Because people hate us because we're Jews, but if they don't think of us as Jews, because we have no more Jewish culture, we just completely integrate, then they won't hate us anymore.
Yeah.
This is kind of his perspective. Of course, this is being used by, you know, Lindbergh and the other, you know, people in his hemisphere as a way, or in his radius, basically, as a means to eliminate Jewish culture, basically.
Yeah.
To go like, okay, we're just going to whitewash all this out, you know?
Yeah, we're going to whitewash all this out. And, you know, basically, Sandy ends up volunteering for this program. He's very excited about it. Sandy basically goes to dinner with a dinner with his parents, and, you know, he expels the virtue of this program to them. Of course, his dad, Herman, isn't enthusiastic about the idea.
Oh, he hates it. Yeah.
But Sandy insists on it, that he's going to go to, I believe it's Kentucky.
Yeah, I think it is.
And, you know, he's going to live on a farm with these non-Jewish, you know, people, and, you know, and he thinks it's going to be like a great experience. So he wants to do it.
Yeah. So his father eventually relents to it. We won't get into all the story about what happens to cause him to go in that direction, but he eventually allows Sandy to do this. But initially his reaction is that this is like an attempt to eliminate, you know, Jewish culture, to say that Jews aren't American enough, and to kind of like cement these anti-Semitic opinions, you know, just into place and turn it into policy. And it's just a tool of discrimination against Jews. So that he's very much against it. They butt heads quite often. It's very bad. But he eventually relents and lets Sandy go on this vacation after a very negative experience also brings up a positive experience. He's in a restaurant. He gets bullied by a very racist man, very anti-Semitic man in this restaurant, and basically is stood up for by both his guide who's with him, but also the people who own the restaurant stand up against this man in favor of him. And this show of kindness is kind of what makes him go, yeah, maybe I will let him go. Maybe there are bad people there, but there could also be good people there.
Right, exactly. So eventually Herman relents and lets Sandy go to do this program.
Even upon returning, Sandy's still a little bitch.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He still loves Lindbergh, and he still hates this Walter Winchell.
He comes back and he's like, he loved Kentucky, he loved that farm, he loved the people living on the farm, he loved everything about it. right? He's like, oh, this is like the greatest thing I ever did. That's his attitude.
Yeah.
So he does not see, because he's so young, he doesn't see what's actually going on, so he doesn't quite understand what's really happening. Like,
he's old enough to be arrogant and opinionated and too young to understand the ramifications of what's happening.
Right, exactly. He just sees it as he took a field trip to a farm, like he doesn't see anything past that, or any motives beyond that.
Mm-hmm. So he comes back from this. He's still like a little entitled bitch about everything. Yeah. To the point, there was a moment in which his dad is listening to Walter Winchell doing an address about how horrible Lindbergh is, and he walks by the room and he's like, I can't believe he believes that shit this liar says. And they get more words. He refers to his dad and mom as like ghetto Jews, and it's just he's starting to buy into like anti-Semitic beliefs,
Yes.
And this is like kind of like the worst point in the relationship between this son and his father, basically, and his family in general, I guess. We had mentioned Walter Winchell was fired from his job as a radio host because of what he said. The rabbi, at the height of his ego, has a perceived insult and forces him to be fired, basically.
Right.
He starts manipulating things to get, his way. This is when the rabbi's at his absolute worst, where he's power hungry at this point. He realizes the power he has, and he's eager to use it in every way, even if it's not right. Even if it's deeply wrong. He's just pushing his own power at this point. And through that, he gets Walter Winchell fired. Walter Winchell ends up running for president. Not too long after he runs for president, Walter Winchell is murdered. This kind of kicks off like kind of the final events of the show when things really escalate and go way out of control. And this is when Sandy finally starts to kind of see what's really going on, because as this happens, Lindbergh also disappears. More on that later. But he disappears, and that causes basically white people, the Klan, all sorts of stuff to just start activating, and people just go out and just start murdering Jews in the streets.
Oh yeah. It becomes pure pandemonium at that point. And
the vice president becomes the acting president. He enacts martial law.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. The vice president, takes power, and he's actually worse than Lindbergh, if you can believe it. But yeah, because he gets way more aggressive with everything, to a point he even has the rabbi arrested, Bingelsdorf.
Yeah, they compare him to a Rasputin.
Yeah.
Basically the idea of Rasputin being this figure that had gotten close to the Queen of Russia and was in her ear and manipulating her. And that's what they're basically saying he is. He's a Jewish Rasputin. Very anti-Semitic image that they're portraying of this, and, that he's this, manipulator in her ear, this Weasley Jew. And this is kind of like the portrait they're painting of him in the press. They're putting out messages about, not with the guy's name, but basically saying this Rasputin-like Jew is, in her ear and manipulating her. And so she had a breakdown. She's being, put away while the vice president seizes his power. And yeah, he just goes after even Bangledorf and Evelyn as well. But my main point of bringing that up now, because there's other stuff that happens before that, is just to say this is the point at which Sandy starts to realize that everything that he was buying into is bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Before his aunt is and uncle are taken in and everything, before all that happens, he is there after Walter Winchell is murdered, and Lindbergh is taking flight, and he's going to show up to Louisville where Winchell was murdered, and he's going to give an address to unify the people, and he basically doesn't do anything of note. No, he basically just says everything's great. It's very Trumpian speech, just ignores everything that's wrong and says everything's great. And even at this point, the rabbi is struggling to hold on to his own narrative about Lindbergh. And Evelyn's just kind of like shocked and scared, and Sandy just goes home and like rips up all his fan art.
Yeah, that was the moment Sandy realized his hero wasn't all he was cracked up to be.
Yeah, he starts to see what's actually happening around him. We should talk about the program that enacted second, because we talked about the first one where they were sending young Jews off to live with. This led into a much worse program, in which they were basically, sending off Jewish families to live in those same kind of areas, in the heartland areas.
Forcefully relocating.
Not like forcing them like a gunpoint, but like basically putting pressure on their jobs.
Well,
so
yeah,
their employers are forcing them to relocate.
Saying like requiring their employers to not relocate them like directly, but relocate their jobs.
Yeah.
And so the idea is like, so basically they make it so that they don't have to go, but if they want to keep their job, then they do.
The rabbi and Evelyn, they add the Levins to this list of people that are going to be sent off. They don't do it though just because of Sandy and his involvement in the program already. They do it largely out of like spite for an argument that Herman had with the rabbi. Herman and the rabbi had like a really blowout argument basically about their different political positions. Rabbi acted all powerful and kind of flexed on that. And then next thing you know, Herman's job is being relocated to Kentucky, the same place where Sandy had stayed. So it's like a kind of what the fuck moment. This is also, as we mentioned, like the height of the rabbi, like, being abusive with his power. So yeah, so his choice is either to like quit his job or go to, be moved out to Kentucky or Kansas or something.
Yeah.
Some farm state. Anyways, Herman tries to like, go against this with like a lawsuit. That doesn't really work. He's getting pressured by FBI agents. I mean, it's just things are not working out well. He even gets to the point where he's going to like go and beg the rabbi to end this, and his wife won't let him do it. She's like, she knows that would like destroy him. And so she can't let that happen. And so she goes and begs, and the rabbi basically just flexes all over her too.
Yeah.
And basically like denies that while this is happening, also the youngest son, Philip, he panics and goes to his aunt and is basically begging her, saying, why are you sending us? Why aren't you sending my neighbor? His parents work there too. His father had died, but his mom works there as well.
And she's like, oh, that's a good idea. I think I'll do that.
Yeah. So she sends this family out there too, but it's not two. It's they end up having to go, but the Levins don't, because the Levin, Herman decides to take a job under his older brother, who's a businessman.
The Levins don't move because Herman takes the out of, quitting his job. He's basically forced to quit his job. Yeah. And take a job with his brother, a more, labor intensive, lower paying job,
Yeah. So, he goes from like basically being an insurance agent to being a, dock worker.
Yeah.
So, it's like a huge step down in status and money, particularly in money, for him, but it's the only way that he can kind of stay in New Jersey.
That's how stubborn Herman is, he's a very stubborn person, and when he doesn't want to do something, he won't do it.
At this point, Sandy's like at his worst, probably. It becomes clear that he knew about all this plan before his father even did, and was like kind of encouraging it from his aunt and the rabbi as well. And then when his little brother is like freaking out about having to go, he's calling his brother like a crybaby. He's irate that his dad won't take the job. He's really angry. As we mentioned, this is like kind of at the height of his shittiness, before he kind of discovers what actually is happening and everything that's up. Yeah, I'm trying to think where to go next on this. Maybe we should talk about Alvin?
That's what I was just going to suggest, actually, yeah, because we haven't talked about Alvin. Obviously, his story is a big part of this. Alvin is a lot like Herman.
Yeah.
And I think the reason they clash so much is because they're so much alike. Because Alvin is also stubborn. Alvin is also, disgusted by what he's seeing happening. And Alvin decides to take action. He's not going to sit around and let things happen. He decides to take action by joining the army, and not
in the Canadian military.
Yeah, not the United States military, because they're not going to war, so he joins the Canadian military, which is against the law for him to do, by the way. I mean, this ends up having an FBI agent, start hounding him when he comes back from the war.
Yeah, and his family,
Yeah, and his family. But he goes there to fight the war on the side of Canada. He ends up losing a leg in an operation, that they were performing. And he comes back a cripple.
Yeah, basically his own frustration and anger leads to it. He's on a mission, and they're hearing this Nazi who's like crying and screaming because he's dying. And he can't take it, so he jumps up, goes across to him to like kill him and spit on him, and he does. But then, a mine goes off and blows up his leg.
Yeah.
He doesn't know at the time. He finds out later that also ended up resulting in another one of his unit being very badly injured, and then another member of his unit died.
Right, yeah. You didn't realize, that was a trap.
Mm-hmm. So it just basically, he's all fucked up from this now. In the book, apparently this is a turning point of his character, where he goes from being idealistic and driven, as we know his character, to being just completely like the opposite. To just completely giving up on any cause and no longer caring about it. Being so embittered that he just doesn't care at all.
Right.
In the show, they tried to kind of like prevent that a little bit by giving him kind of other reasons to be still involved and giving him other connections into the story that kind of show that he still has some level of involvement. That would probably actually be maybe my biggest problem with the show, is there's a moment at the very end in which we had mentioned Charles Lindbergh disappearing. Basically, like, some British spies like reached out to Alvin and got him involved in this operation where they were using radar equipment to track Lindbergh's plane after he made that really short address that pissed off Sandy and everything.
Yeah.
And they're gonna like basically abduct Lindbergh. They're gonna track him and abduct him. And this apparently is successful, even though Alvin himself isn't the one that leads towards it happening. He basically, like, at a certain point they get a call and they say, okay, shut it down. We don't need you anymore. You take off, take this car, go to the spot, and then there'll be another car and you can take that. And he's like, what's going on? And turns out basically like he was one of many people that they had, put around looking for where this was going to happen, trying to track this plane. And he ended up being unimportant. Another one ended up actually getting Lindbergh's signal. And the idea is that, although we don't get any confirmation, the idea is that they ended up abducting Lindbergh. It was successful, and this is thought to him.
We don't get exactly what happened, but from this point,
he transfers cars, and in the car is a newspaper that says Lindbergh disappeared. So it's like a cryptic way of saying, we got the son of a bitch,
Right.
I think this is probably the single worst thing about this show. The thing that just didn't work for me, and I think the reason it didn't work for me is it was too big. Like, all of this was about this like small scale of like seeing this huge thing from the perspective of a family, and all of a sudden you throw in this cousin is like involved in a secret plot with the British, and
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. They had to move the plot forward somehow, so I'm not too upset about it.
I can understand that, but it's just, I don't know. I have some issues with that. I didn't like that. That was a change from the book as well. In the book, he just kind of disappeared.
Yeah, the book doesn't really offer an explanation for why Lindbergh disappears.
You're seeing everything from this kid's perspective, and that's part of that, that he's not privy to all the information.
And since like the show isn't exclusively from from Philip's perspective anymore, then that kind of, you can't get away with that, at that,
Mm-hmm.
So you can't just have Lindbergh like disappear for no reason. I realize why they had to do it.
I do as well. I just don't like what they did with it. And it's also because, after it happens, when he disappears, like, the vice president, when he takes power, is like talking about a plot of, the Brits and Jews to abduct him and all stuff like that. And it's like, so it's giving truth to these arguments, and I don't like that either, I mean, it's fair, you could say, like, from the perspective that even the resistance against Lindbergh isn't necessarily in a great light, and that is more realistic, but at the same time, it just, I don't know, it left kind of a little bit of a dirty taste in my mouth.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Another big difference about the ending of this show versus the book is that in the book, apparently, FDR runs again, is elected, and basically history retakes its path. Like Pearl Harbor ends up happening, all these things end up happening. And
yeah, the ending of the show is different because we don't know who wins the election, and we see like all these scenes of basically, vote tampering by these, mysterious people who we're assumed to believe like it's pro Lindbergh people, stealing ballots and, burning ballots and all this. And yeah, I just thought, I don't know, I just thought for an ending, for it to end on that note, I thought I was like way too pessimistic. I felt like the whole series had been so dour and it had been so like relentless. I thought just like a ray of hope at the end would have been nice. Would have been like some bounce to say like, yeah, things can get unbelievably dark, but there's always like an upturn, like history isn't always on like this curve of, things just getting worse and worse. Like there's always ebbs and flows to things, and I just thought
it's a pendulum.
It's a pendulum. I thought just like that little bit of hope at the end would have been nice.
Mm-hmm.
That was my problem with the ending.
Yeah, I mean, that ties in. I had a little issue with that too. Part of a little bit of the issue I had with that as well is that they played off the idea of kind of like the Italian mob, or like people that were mob connected and Italians, as actually being like really on the side of the Jews.
Oh,
and
I didn't.
They showed this with a part in which, they get a new neighbor after their Selden and his mom end up moving away.
An Italian neighbor, yeah.
Yeah, who's very supportive. And then they see these men walking up and down the streets and they're scared and they think that they're out to hurt them, only to find out that they're there to protect them, and that it's connected to the Italian mob. That the Italian mob is sending these patrols up and down these streets to protect these Jewish families.
Right. Which eventually, like, after Lindbergh disappears, the police and like the KKK basically like kill the mob members that were patrolling the street. Mm-hmm. I remember like there's one point where like they're like, yeah, the people that were patrolling were basically dead.
Yeah. Well, we saw it as Herman was coming home and he looked out his window and saw him dead on the street.
Yeah.
And then his neighbor, who was Italian, ended up kind of confirming that it was the cops that had killed them. But where this ties in, why I brought up this whole thing, is in the voting scene, before they show the votes being burned, you see them taking out one of the ballot, like the things that they put all the ballots in. You see a group of men taking it out of a voting thing. And somebody in line says, "Where are you taking that?" And the guy says, "It's being fixed." And he sounds like he's like Italian. At least that came across to me.
Right. It's the thing is like, the thing about that too is like, it's ambiguous. We don't know what side these guys are on. We just see like people like, taking, it's ambiguous.
Yeah. Yeah, because the idea could be that, people in favor of FDR, like basically this can never happen again. What just happened with Lindbergh can never happen again. And so they're interfering with the election to stop something like that from happening again. So that's one way you can look at it. And the other way is to what we'd already brought up, which is that this is like similar to what is kind of happening now with like all the like legal measures, not actually straight up burning ballots, but legal measures to suppress votes that are occurring right now. And have kind of always occurred in minority neighborhoods and stuff. And
since we don't get the results of the election, we can only like imagine, it's an ambiguous ending. It's an ending that can go either way depending on how you look at it. But I just thought, I don't know, I just thought it would, with them ending without like confirming the results of the election, I just felt pessimistic. Like, I don't know, I took like the immediate worst case scenario, like,
After hearing about today, well, but even if that they were against a Lindbergh-like candidate being elected again, and they were doing it to stop like a Lindbergh-like candidate, that's still pessimistic because it's saying that we have to resort towards like, voter fraud in order to protect our country. So it's still pessimistic, like in a different way. Even if you take it in that it would result in FDR winning again or something, it's still pessimistic. So I do have issue with that myself. And that all ties in with the whole thing for me that I'd said before about Lindbergh's disappearance because, the original way that the book ended apparently was that Lindbergh just kind of disappeared and nobody really knew why. Like if he had just taken off because he saw that, that everything had gotten out of hand, so he just left. And that's very like kind of classic literature. It's like the idea of the mysterious man comes into town, stirs everything up, and then disappears. And so that kind of fits into that kind of mold of like that kind of Lindbergh being that kind of figure. He flies in on his airplane, lands, gives a very short speech, his 42 words or whatever it is that they always refer to. Says his bit, gets on the plane, leaves again. And it's like never elaborates beyond that. Just kind of like, and it's like this mysterious figure. And that's kind of goes even with the way he's presented in the show, is like it takes a long time before you even see his face. You just kind of see like a profile or like his from his back or his hand, you know, as he's shaking someone's hand. It's like it kind of keeps away from his face to kind of make him more like this almost like mythical figure or something, you know?
Right.
And so that kind of plays into the idea of the original ending, though, with the original ending of the book of him just kind of, he shows up, he ruins everything, and then he disappears. When it's like irreparably messed up, when everything's at its worst, he just disappears. And that, you know, like, it's an example of like, this is what happened, but we were able to pull through and return and things, and like history kind of retook its regular path. Like, you know, Pearl Harbor still happened. We still got in the war. All that stuff still connected us, you know, ahead. But like all this shit happened as well, kind of like before, you know? And I kind of like the idea of that a lot more than what we ended up getting. And that goes both to the way Lindbergh was abducted, but also to the whole thing about the ending that you had mentioned. You know?
Yeah, I like the idea from the book that history course corrected itself, and you don't get that in the show, you know. Yeah. So it was kind of disappointing.
I think the reason they didn't do that on the show is that David Simon was leaving the note to say, "Get the fuck out there and vote now."
Yeah.
You want to see how this election goes? Well, we'll find out in 2020, you know? I think that was kind of his message. You know, just knowing enough about David Simon, that seems like that's what it was.
Right. Like a lot of things, like the show is a parallel of what's really happening, you know? So yeah, I can see that.
So I guess, I mean, that kind of covers up most of the discussion that we wanted to have. I just thought, you know, let's open it up now and just say kind of what were some of the kind of powerful scenes and interesting scenes that were in the show that either had an impact on us or that we liked or whatever, you know? And I'll start just by saying, Jesus, that scene where Selden was calling Bess Levin and saying that he thought his mom was dead because she wasn't home.
Oh, God,
and then she's ducking down because there's literally gunshots outside her house.
Right.
And you just hear this boy, like, crying and freaking out that his mom's dying, and she's trying to keep him calm.
And it's all the more worse because you know in that moment that, you know, his fears about his mom are not, you know, unfounded.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like, you get like the sinking feeling in your gut that, oh shit, yeah, something did happen. And, you know, that's confirmed later on.
Yeah, that whole trip was another fucked up, you know?
Yeah, that whole,
Sandy, God.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was gonna say, like, yeah, that's another scene that was like when Herman and Sandy are going to pick up Sheldon, and they drive through the center of town, and there's all these like Klansmen in full Klan regalia, you know, just like standing around and shit, and you don't know, like, if they're gonna do anything. They just like stand there and like stare at them as they like drive on by, but it's so tense.
One just slowly walks in front of the car.
Yes.
And is like staring at them, and it's like, fuck. And the father's like reaching for a gun. He doesn't know if he's gonna have to use it.
Yeah, that was intense.
They kind of played on the whole Chekhov's gun thing, because they kept showing that gun, even like way before that, when the Italian guy was like giving it to him, when he refused it, and then when he eventually ended up taking it, and then when he tried to give it back because he didn't want it, and when he took it on the thing, and then you had like the kids that saw it and them looking at it, and there's so much that's like, that gun is gonna go off. Something's gonna happen. That's Chekhov's gun. That's like a rule of storytelling. That gun has become way too prominent for it not to go off at some point, you know?
Right.
But it didn't. And so instead what we got is just the tension, the threat of that gun, knowing that gun was going to go off, even though it never ended up doing, was so tense. From the moment that he had that gun, you're like, something is going to go horribly wrong with this gun. And I don't know about you, but like, I was like sitting in that tension from the point that gun was revealed.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Another thing, was the scene with the assassination of Walter Winchell, where he's giving that speech, and then, all those supporters are there, then you see, these guys, these white supremacist thugs just pouring into the crowd, and they're just, they start beating on... I believe he was killed during that.
No. He was killed he was killed in Louisville. That happened in New Jersey, because
okay.
He was killed at another event that ended up in a similar way to that. He escaped that one and got killed at another.
But that whole thing was crazy, though.
Yeah. I mean, that brings up another thing, which is the way they revealed the death of Walter Winchell, which was just Bess was in a building in an elevator and just overheard somebody talking about it.
Yeah.
In a really matter-of-fact way, and excusing it too. He just wouldn't shut his mouth. It was his fault,
Yeah,
because he was criticizing Lindbergh and stuff, and her just panicking and running out of there, and what that, that realizing that everything was, that the shit was about to hit the fan, which it just started right after that, but yeah, that was, those are all crazy scenes. I also really like the dream sequence at the beginning of episode 3 that started with Philip, and he was kind of sitting in the middle of a street, and his street, not in the city or something. And he was playing with his stamp collection, and they were all Nazi Germany stamps and stuff.
Yeah, they're all Hitler.
Yeah.
Showing Philip's anxieties.
Yeah, exactly. They did a great job with that, and and it has more meaning when you consider that Philip Levin is actually Philip Roth, the author of the book, and in the book was literally named Philip Roth, and it's from his perspective. And so you really get a peek into his anxieties and stuff. It's interesting. Is there anything else you want to kind of bring up before we end off?
I think that's good.
Yeah, that's, if you still haven't watched The Plot Against America and you just listen to us spoil it all and talk about all the different ways we think about it, it's still a great show to watch. It's not a binge. Don't binge the show. Every hour of this show feels like 3 hours. It's dense, it's heavy, it's dark as hell, and it's anxiety inducing. So just if you're gonna watch this show, kind of carve out an hour every couple days or something and watch it slow and take your time. And it's rewarding to watch through, I think. I think it's a really good show, but it is dark and heavy and slow.
Yeah, it is, but it was fantastic. I know you struggled with it at first because you were telling me it was so slow, but I'm just stick with it because it is kind of so it's weird because these kind of slow moving character dramas usually I don't get into them too much, but this kind of hooked me because it kind of every episode it ratchets up the tension, and it keeps doing that every episode until at the end of the show things explode, it gets insane, and yeah, it's really great. I mean, it was just a really good show. I was into it, and I was just telling you, I was just stick with it, man. It's good,
I knew it was. It's one of those things where when you have a limited amount of stuff to watch, and almost everything that was coming out around that time was also kind of dark and slow, and it's I just wanted something light, something. Right. It didn't even have to be light. It just had to be fun. The Boys isn't light, but it's fun,
Right, exactly.
The Boys is really dark, but it's dark in a fun way where you kind of enjoy it at the same time as it's fucking you up. But it's Game of Thrones would be another example of that. Besides everybody hating the last season, just ignoring that, just Game of Thrones in general can be very bleak and dark and depressing, but it can also be very fun and enthralling and get you really involved in it or something. And I needed something to watch that was going to be more like that, and we had Lost when we were doing the rewatch, and that was giving me everything I wanted. And then when we finished that, it was should I watch more Plot Against America? Should I get back into it? And it's I just can't get myself to sit down and watch something that dark and bleak. I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't get myself into the mood to watch it. But it's definitely one of those shows. Like I said, just don't binge it. It's only 6 episodes.
Oh, I couldn't binge it. I watched it. Thankfully, HBO does a week-to-week thing, and I watched it week to week, which is how I suggest you watch it, like, or at least just don't watch episodes back to back. You'll probably be like really depressed at the end of that.
Yeah, you'll like slit your wrist by the end. So it's just don't do it. Just take your time, get through it, and it's a very rewarding experience when you make it through to the end. It's never gonna like uplift you and make you really happy at the end. That's not what I mean by rewarding. I mean it's rewarding by the fact that you'll come out of it feeling like you know more, or you're like, you'll come out feeling good about what you've learned through the process and the characters you've known along the way.
Yes.
But yeah, so definitely recommend just take it slow. But that's it for The Plot Against America. Next week, we are going to be talking about Westworld Season 3. That's another one that we've put off for similar reasons. It's pretty dreary, too.
I don't know. I'm just not getting into it. We'll see what happens when I finish it. But yeah, it's kind of like, also like that premiered at the same time as this, and I was more into this than Westworld. So like I dropped Westworld to just like watch The Plot Against America.
It'd be hard to watch both because they're both kind of slow and dark and dreary.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've been meaning to get to Westworld. We've always covered Westworld on the podcast, so it's like, of course we're going to get to it eventually. It was just it got a little bit delayed for us, but we're catching up on it now, and that's what we're going to be talking about next week. Will be season 3 of Westworld. Until then, here's what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. On Tuesday, June 30th, DNA comes to Netflix. That's an anime series, I believe. On Thursday, July 2nd, Warrior Nun comes to Netflix, and The Family Business comes to BET+. On Friday, July 3rd, Hannah comes to Amazon Prime. The Babysitters Club comes to Netflix. Cable Girls comes to Netflix. Ju-on Origin comes to Netflix. And Hamilton, the musical, not a TV show, just a live recording of the musical, premieres on Disney+. So if you've been waiting years to finally watch Hamilton and could never afford those tickets, well, now you can watch it on Disney+. On Wednesday, July 8th, Stateless, a miniseries, comes to Netflix. On Thursday, July 9th, Close Enough comes to HBO Max, as well as Japan Sinks 2020, which is like an anime about a huge natural disaster and people in Japan trying to survive it, basically. That's an anime. I watched one similar that was about an earthquake maybe 10 years ago, something like that. That was really good. So I'm looking forward to that. On Friday, July 10th, Little Voice comes to Apple TV+. And lastly, on Sunday, July 12th, P-Valley comes to Stars. That's a new drama about a strip club.
Okay.
So that's it. That's what's coming up in the week ahead. Until then, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. You can follow Will. He is at Foxel Hero. You can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, as well as our site, thetotalscreen.com. You can subscribe to this podcast through any major podcast client like iTunes or Pocket Cast, and the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Good night.
Good night.
If you would like to reach out to us and make a comment, send an email to contact@thetotalscreen.com. Stay tuned to The Total Screen for the very